37 American pilots died in 6 weeks, all of them the same way. And nobody knew why. It wasn't the engines. The twin Allison V1710 SARS ran perfectly. It wasn't the guns. 450s and a 20mm cannon, all working fine. It wasn't even pilot error, though that's what the reports said. Every single time. Pilot error during defensive maneuvering. But the pilots knew better. The ones who survived, at least. They'd come back from missions over New Guinea with the same story. The P-38 Lightning felt slow. Not slow like lack of speed. Slow like the airplane was thinking about what you wanted before it actually did it. A fraction of a second between moving the stick and the plane responding. That fraction of a second was the difference between shooting down a 0 and getting shot down by 1. The problem was this: the 0 could turn. The Lightning couldn't. Not like a 0 could anyway. Japanese pilots knew it. American pilots knew it. The training manuals were crystal clear about it. Never turn with a 0. Never try to outmaneuver them. Use your speed. Use your altitude. Dive in, shoot, climb out. Hit and run. Don't get caught in a turning fight. Good advice. Terrible in practice. Because combat doesn't follow training manuals. Combat is chaos. And in chaos you don't always get to choose. Sometimes the 0 chooses for you. Sometimes you're already in the turn before you realize you shouldn't be. And by then it's too late. August 1943. Dobodura airfield, New Guinea. The heat was suffocating. The kind of heat that made metal too hot to touch and turned the inside of an aircraft hangar into an oven. Technical Sergeant Thomas Sullivan worked in that oven every day. 8 months he'd been maintaining P-38 SARS. 8 months of pre-flight checks and post-flight repairs. 8 months of watching pilots climb into cockpits, watching them take off, watching them either come back or not come back. The ones who didn't come back stayed with you. Sullivan was from Long Beach, California. Worked on cars before the war. Hot rods mostly. Knew engines inside and out. Could hear when something wasn't right just by listening. The Army Air Forces needed mechanics who understood machines, so Sullivan enlisted. They sent him to tech school, taught him aircraft systems, gave him 3 stripes and shipped him to the Pacific. Now he fixed airplanes, or tried to. Hard to fix a problem when the problem wasn't supposed to exist. The P-38's aileron control cables ran through the twin booms to the tail section, then forward through a series of pulleys to the wing control surfaces. Standard cable and pulley system. Simple. Reliable. Except it had slack. Not much. Maybe a centimeter at full deflection. Factory specifications said that was acceptable. Engineering tolerances allowed for it. The cables were within spec. Everything was within spec. But pilots were still dying. Sullivan noticed it first on a Thursday morning. He was doing a routine inspection on a Lightning that had just returned from a mission. The pilot, a kid named Lieutenant Frank Martinez, was still shaking when he climbed out of the cockpit. Martinez was from Sacramento. 3 weeks in theater. This was his 4th mission. Martinez said a 0 had gotten inside his turn. He tried to roll out and dive away like the manual said. But the airplane felt slow to respond. Like there was a delay between his brain saying roll and the airplane actually rolling. The 0 almost got him. Only reason he survived was his wingman shot the 0 off his tail. Sullivan looked at the bullet holes in Martinez's left boom. 3 rounds. Tight group. Perfect deflection shooting. The 0 pilot had led him exactly right. Had anticipated exactly where the airplane would be. That shouldn't have been possible if Martinez had rolled hard and dove immediately. Unless the airplane had delayed just long enough for the 0 to get the lead right. Martinez didn't fly again. His plane went back to the dipole for repairs. Sullivan never saw him after that. 2 weeks later he heard Martinez had been killed flying a different P-38 over Rabaul. Same story. Caught in a turning fight. Couldn't roll out fast enough. Sullivan started paying attention after that. Started listening to what the pilots said when they came back. Started noticing patterns. They all said the same thing. The P-38 felt mushy in hard maneuvering. Controls felt like they were moving through mud. Most pilots thought that was just how heavy fighters handled. Big airplane, big control surfaces, some delay was expected. But Sullivan knew that wasn't normal. He'd worked on enough control systems to know what normal felt like. This wasn't normal. He started checking cable tension during inspections. Started plucking them like guitar strings, listening to the tone. Loose cables sounded different than tight cables. Every P-38 on the line had cables that sounded slightly loose. Within spec, sure, but loose. Captain Richard Thompson died on a Tuesday. Thompson was a flight leader, experienced. 11 kills. He knew the P-38 inside and out, knew its limitations, flew smart. On August 3, Thompson's flight intercepted 8 zeros at 12,000 feet over Uro Bay. Thompson got 1 zero on the first pass. Came around for another run. 2 zeros reversed on him. Sullivan heard the radio traffic afterward. Thompson tried to roll inverted and split sails away. Called out that his controls felt mushy. The zeros stayed with him through the maneuver. Shot him down at 4,000 feet. Thompson's wingman said it looked like Thompson's airplane wasn't responding fast enough. Like he was fighting the controls. Thompson died in the crash. Thompson's crew chief was a guy named Rodriguez. Good mechanic. Texas. Rodriguez was convinced something was wrong with Thompson's aircraft. He checked everything after they recovered the wreckage. Engine settings. Control surface rigging. Cable tensions. Everything was within spec. Nothing wrong with the airplane. The official report said pilot error. Rodriguez didn't believe it. Neither did Sullivan. By mid-August, Sullivan had watched 17 pilots die. Some he knew well. Most he'd only met briefly during pre-flight checks. But he'd worked on all their aircraft. Had signed off their maintenance logs. Had watched them taxi out. Watched them take off. Some came back. Some didn't. The ones who came back told the same story over and over. The P-38 felt slow to respond in hard maneuvering. Like there was a lag between control input and aircraft reaction. A tiny lag. Barely noticeable. But in combat, barely noticeable was enough to get you killed. Sullivan mentioned it to Rodriguez one evening after Thompson died. Rodriguez asked what could be done about it. Sullivan said nothing official. But unofficially there was a solution. It just required braking regulations that could get them both court-martialed. The regulations were clear. No field mechanic had authorization to modify flight control systems. That required engineering approval from Lockheed. And Lockheed was 7,000 miles away in California. But Sullivan had an idea. A stupid idea. Probably. The kind of idea that gets you thrown in the stockade. He'd been thinking about it for weeks. The slack in the cables. That was the problem. If you could eliminate the slack, you could eliminate the delay. The airplane would respond instantly to control input. No lag. No hesitation. How do you eliminate slack? You tension the cable. Add preload. But you couldn't just tighten the existing system. The specifications were set. The cable lengths were fixed. You'd have to add something in line. Something that would take up the slack without changing the cable routing. Sullivan had a piece of piano wire in his tool bag. High tensile steel. About 6 inches long. He'd pulled it from a salvaged P-38 that had ground looped 2 weeks earlier. The plane was scrap, but Sullivan pulled useful parts before it went to the depot, including this wire from the rudder trim system. He didn't know why he kept it. Just did. Now he knew why. Piano wire. Strong. Flexible. Perfect for what he had in mind. If you bent it into a Z shape, it could act as an inline tensioner. Install it between the cable end and the pulley. Add just enough preload to eliminate the slack. Simple. Elegant. Completely unauthorized. Sullivan thought about it for 3 days. Thought about the regulations. Thought about what would happen if he got caught. Court-martial. Dishonorable discharge. Maybe prison. But he also thought about Martinez. About Thompson. About the other 15 pilots who died because their airplanes responded a fraction of a second too slow. On the evening of August 16th, Lieutenant Daniel Carter came to the maintenance area. Carter was 23, farm kid from Iowa. He'd flown 6 combat missions, 0 kills. Not because he was a bad pilot, because he followed the rules, and the rules kept putting him in positions where he couldn't get a shot. Carter's 3rd mission, he dove on a 0 from altitude. Built up speed to 400 miles per hour. Came in from the sun like the manual said. Got the Zero in his gun sight. Started to pull lead for deflection. The Zero snap-rolled left and dove. Carter tried to follow. His P-38 rolled into the turn, but it felt like it was moving through molasses. By the time his airplane pointed where he wanted it, the Zero was gone. Fourth mission was worse. Carter and his wingman jumped 2 Zeros at 15,000 feet. Carter got the first burst off. Missed. The Zero reversed hard right. Carter rolled to follow. His wingman called out 2 more Zeros coming in from above. Carter tried to roll back level and dive away. The airplane responded. But slowly. Just slowly enough that one of the diving Zeros got a 3-second burst into Carter's right boom. 20 mm cannon shells. They didn't penetrate, but they scared Carter badly enough that he broke off and ran for home with his engines smoking. Fifth mission, Carter watched his wingman die. The wingman's name was Lieutenant Michael Anderson, 21 years old, Boston. They'd gone through training together. On August 14th, Anderson got separated from the formation during a dogfight over Finschhafen. 2 Zeros got on his tail. Anderson tried everything. Rolled hard. Reversed. Tried to scissor. The Zeros stayed with him through every maneuver. Carter heard Anderson on the radio calling for help. Heard the panic in his voice. Heard him say his airplane wasn't turning fast enough. Heard the gunfire. Heard Anderson scream. Then nothing. Carter didn't sleep that night. Neither did most of the squadron. Anderson's bed stayed empty. His personal effects got packed up and shipped home. His P-38 was written off as combat loss. The maintenance log noted no mechanical issues. The official cause was pilot error during defensive maneuvering. Sullivan had worked on Anderson's aircraft the morning he died. Everything was perfect. Engine timing, control surface alignment, cable tension within spec. The airplane was fine, but Anderson was dead anyway, and Sullivan knew why. That fraction of a second delay in the controls, that tiny bit of slack the manual said was acceptable. It had killed Anderson just like it killed Thompson and Martinez and 14 others. On the evening of August 16th, Carter found Sullivan working on his assigned P-38. Carter asked if there was anything Sullivan could do to make the airplane roll faster. Anything at all. Carter said he didn't care if it was by the book or not. He just wanted a chance. Sullivan looked at Carter, saw the fear, saw the desperation, saw a kid who knew he was going to die if something didn't change. Sullivan told Carter to come back in the morning. He'd see what he could do. Sullivan worked alone that night. The maintenance hangar was quiet after 11. Most of the crew had gone to sleep. The only sounds were the distant rumble of generators and the buzz of insects against the overhead lights. The air smelled like engine oil and tropical humidity. He pulled the inspection panel off Carter's P-38 left boom. The metal was still warm from the day's sun. Inside, the aileron control cable ran through a series of pulleys toward the tail section. Sullivan grabbed the cable with both hands and pulled. Felt the slack, maybe a centimeter of play before the tension caught. His hands were covered in grease. His fingers ached from a full day of maintenance work, but he could feel that slack clearly. It was wrong. He knew it was wrong. The piano wire came from his tool bag. He sat on the hangar floor with the wire and a pair of pliers, started bending it into a Z shape. The wire was stiff, fought back against the pliers. His hands slipped twice, cut his thumb on the second try. The blood made the wire slippery. He wiped it on his coveralls and kept working. Took him about 10 minutes to get the bend right. The Z-shape would act as an inline tensioner, would add just enough preload to the cable to eliminate the slack. Installing it was harder. The space inside the boom was tight. Sullivan had to work with one hand while holding a flashlight with the other. The beam kept moving. Shadows jumped across the cable system. His shoulder wedged against the boom structure. The metal edge cut into his arm. He could feel sweat running down his back despite the night air. He disconnected the cable at the pulley junction. His fingers fumbled with the clevis pin, dropped it, heard it bounce somewhere in the boom. Spent 5 minutes feeling around in the dark until he found it. The whole time his heart was pounding. If the engineering officer found him doing unauthorized modifications to a flight control system, he'd face a court-martial, possibly a dishonorable discharge, maybe prison time. But Carter was going to die if Sullivan didn't do something. He inserted the piano wire tensioner between the cable end and the pulley, reconnected the cable. The fit was tight. He had to force the clivus pin through. When it finally seated, he tested the tension by hand, pulled on the cable. No slack. The control surface moved immediately. Perfect. Sullivan replaced the inspection panel, cleaned up his tools, wiped the blood off the wire and his hands, walked out of the hangar at 1:15 in the morning. The tropical night was humid and still. Somewhere in the distance he heard aircraft engines. Japanese night raiders probably. The sound made his stomach clench. He'd just modified a flight control system without authorization, used a non-standard part, violated at least a dozen regulations. If the modification failed during flight, Carter would crash, and Sullivan would be responsible. But if it worked, Carter might live. Sullivan went to his bunk, didn't sleep, watched the ceiling until dawn. At 6:30 he walked to the flight line, watched the crew fuel and arm Carter's aircraft, watched Carter walk out for his pre-flight briefing, watched him climb into the cockpit. At 7:40 Carter took off. Sullivan stood on the flight line and watched the P-38 climb into the morning sky, watched it join formation with 16 other aircraft, watched them head northwest toward Japanese airspace, and then all he could do was wait. The engagement started around 8. Carter's flight of 4 P-38s intercepted 9 Zeros at 13,000 feet over Huon Gulf. The morning sun was behind them. Perfect setup for a diving attack. Carter was flying number 3 position. His element leader called out the bounce. They rolled in. Carter picked a 0 at the back of the formation. Dove from altitude. Built speed to 380 miles per hour. The 0 grew larger in his gun sight. Carter could see the painted rising sun on the fuselage, could see the pilot's head in the canopy. He pressed the trigger. The 450 caliber machine guns and single 20 mm cannon hammered. Tracers reached out. Most missed. A few hits sparked off the 0's wing. Not enough. The 0 snap rolled right and dove. Carter rolled to follow. And that's when he felt it. The airplane responded instantly. No delay. No lag. The stick moved, and the aircraft rolled immediately. Carter had never felt his P-38 move like that. It was like the airplane had been waiting for his command and executed it the moment he gave it. He rolled 90 degrees in what felt like half the normal time, got his nose down. The 0 was right there in his sight picture. He fired again. 3-second burst. The rounds walked up the 0's fuselage from tail to cockpit. The 0's engine exploded. Pieces flew off. The aircraft rolled inverted and fell toward the jungle below, trailing black smoke. Carter's first kill. But there was no time to celebrate. His wingman called out 0's diving from above. Carter looked up, saw 3 of them coming down in a shallow dive. Coming fast. They'd seen him shoot down their friend. Now they wanted revenge. Carter shoved the throttles forward, started to climb. But the 0's were faster in the dive. They'd be on him in seconds. His only option was to reverse and fight. Every instinct screamed at him to keep climbing, keep running. That was the doctrine. But doctrine meant dying today. He rolled hard left. Pulled. The P-38 snapped around like nothing he'd ever experienced. The nose came through the horizon. He saw the lead 0. It was turning to follow him, but hadn't expected Carter to reverse that fast. The 0 was in a bad position. Exposed. Carter pulled lead. Fired. Hit the 0 in the left wing root. The wing folded. The 0 tumbled. 2 kills in 30 seconds. The other 2 0's tried to scissor with him, alternating turns to force an overshoot. Carter stayed with them. Every time they reversed direction, his P-38 snapped into the turn instantly. No delay. No fighting the controls. The airplane did exactly what he wanted the moment he wanted it. It was like flying a different aircraft. Like someone had removed invisible weights from the control system. 1 0 made a mistake. Reversed too hard. Bled too much speed. Carter got inside his turn. Close range. Maybe 200 feet. He fired. Couldn't miss. The Zero came apart. Pieces of aircraft fell past Carter's canopy. He felt the P-38 shudder as debris hit his right boom. 3 kills. The fourth Zero ran. Carter didn't chase. He was low on fuel and ammunition. He climbed back to altitude. Reformed with what was left of his flight. They headed home. The entire engagement lasted 7 minutes. When Carter landed at Dobodura at 9, Sullivan was waiting on the flight line. Carter shut down the engines. Climbed out of the cockpit. His hands were shaking. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. He walked straight to Sullivan. Carter said 2 words. It worked. What neither of them realized was that 6 other pilots had watched Carter's engagement from altitude. Captain Frank Mitchell saw the entire fight from 15,000 feet. Mitchell was a flight leader in the 475th Fighter Group. He'd been watching Carter's element engage the Zeros below when he noticed something unusual. Carter's P-38 was rolling faster than any Lightning Mitchell had ever seen. The aircraft snapped through maneuvers like it weighed half what it should. Mitchell knew every pilot in the theater, knew their skill levels. Carter was good, but not that good. Something was different about his airplane. After landing, Mitchell found Carter in the debriefing room. Carter was still amped up on adrenaline, hands shaking as he filled out the combat report. 3 confirmed kills. Mitchell asked him what was different. Carter said he didn't know. His airplane just responded better today. Faster. Mitchell asked if maintenance had done anything to the aircraft. Carter said he should talk to Technical Sergeant Sullivan. Mitchell found Sullivan in the maintenance area 2 hours later. Sullivan was working on a different P-38. His hands were black with grease. His coveralls were stained with hydraulic fluid. Mitchell asked him directly, "What did you do to Carter's airplane?" Sullivan looked at him for a long moment, then told him, "The piano wire tensioner, the cable modification, the unauthorized change to the flight control system." Mitchell listened without interrupting. When Sullivan finished, Mitchell asked if he could do the same modification to Mitchell's aircraft. Sullivan said yes. But Mitchell had to understand the risks. The modification wasn't approved, wasn't tested. If something went wrong, both of them would face charges. Mitchell said he didn't care. He'd lost 4 pilots in his flight in the past month, all caught in turning fights they couldn't escape. If there was something that could help them survive, he wanted it. Regulations could wait. That evening Sullivan modified Mitchell's P-38. Same piano wire tensioner. Same installation method. Mitchell flew it the next morning. Came back raving about the improvement. The airplane rolled like a fighter instead of a truck, he told his wingman. The wingman told Sullivan he wanted the modification too. By August 20th, Sullivan had modified 9 aircraft. Word spread through the squadron. Pilots started asking their crew chiefs if they'd heard about the cable modification. Some crew chiefs refused. Said it was against regulations. Others were willing to try. Sullivan showed them how. Cut the piano wire. Bend it into a Z shape. Install it as an inline tensioner. Takes about 10 minutes. Changes everything. The modification spread pilot to pilot. Mechanic to mechanic. No official documentation. No engineering approval. Just whispered conversations in the ready room and maintenance area. Carter shot down 2 more Zeros on August 22nd using the modified controls. Mitchell got 3 on August 25th. Other pilots started coming back from missions with kills. The statistics were impossible to ignore. Lieutenant James Watkins was a crew chief with the 49th Fighter Group stationed at Guinea. He heard about the modification from a pilot who transferred from Dobodura. Watkins was skeptical, but he tried it on 1 aircraft. The pilot came back from the next mission with his first kill after 8 weeks of combat. Watkins modified 4 more aircraft. Other crew chiefs in the 49th started doing it too. By early September, maybe 40 P-38 in New Guinea had the modification. The engineering officer at Dobodura noticed something was different, but couldn't figure out what. Control cable tensions checked out during inspections because the crew chiefs removed the tensioners before inspections and reinstalled them afterward. The pilots knew. The mechanics knew. Nobody told the officers. The kill ratio started shifting. In July, American pilots in the Southwest Pacific lost 2 P-38, other for every 0 destroyed. In August, it was 1.3 to 1. By September, it was nearly even. Something had changed. But officially nobody knew what. Then the Japanese noticed. Japanese fighter pilots first reported the change in late August. Flight reports from the 11th Air Fleet mentioned that American P-38s were maneuvering more aggressively, rolling faster into turns, reversing direction more quickly. The reports noted that tactics which had worked reliably for months were suddenly failing. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai was one of Japan's top aces, 64 confirmed kills. He'd been fighting American pilots since Pearl Harbor. On September 3, 1943, Sakai engaged a P-38 over Wewak. He used his standard tactic, drew the American into a turning fight, waited for the P-38 to begin its roll, then snapped his turn back the opposite direction to get inside the American's turning radius. Except the P-38 reversed with him. Sakai had executed this maneuver dozens of times. He knew exactly how long it took a P-38 to roll, knew the timing perfectly, but this P-38 rolled faster than it should have. Sakai barely avoided a head-on collision. The American got guns on him. Sakai had to dive away. He returned to base confused and frustrated. Other experienced Japanese pilots reported similar encounters. The Americans weren't flying differently. They were still using the same tactics, but their aircraft were responding faster, fractionally, but enough to matter, enough to disrupt the timing that Japanese pilots had learned to exploit. Japanese intelligence tried to determine what had changed. They examined wreckage from downed P-38s, found no obvious modifications. The aircraft looked identical to the ones they'd been fighting for months. The engines were the same. The armament was the same. Nothing visible had changed. What the Japanese didn't know was that the change was hidden inside the boom. A 6-inch piece of piano wire that looked like original equipment. Even if they'd found it, they might not have understood its purpose. It wasn't a new weapon system. Wasn't a new engine. Just a minor modification to control cable tension. But that minor modification was killing their pilots. By mid-September, Japanese pilots were losing aircraft to P-38s at rates they hadn't seen since early in the war. The psychological impact was significant. For 2 years, 0 pilots had owned the sky in turning fights. They knew they could outmaneuver anything the Americans flew. That confidence was breaking down. Pilots who used to press attacks were becoming cautious, hesitant. They weren't sure anymore if their tactics would work. The Japanese tried to adapt. Some pilots stopped trying to get into turning fights with P-38s, used hit-and-run tactics instead. But that meant giving up their main advantage. The Zero's strength was maneuverability. Fighting like a P-38 meant fighting on American terms. And the P-38 was faster, more heavily armed, and could take more damage. Other pilots tried to compensate by being more aggressive, closing to shorter range before firing, taking more risks. But aggression without the ability to outturn the enemy just meant dying faster. Several experienced Japanese pilots were killed in September trying tactics that had worked perfectly in July. The fundamental problem for Japanese pilots was that they were fighting an enemy they couldn't see. They knew something had changed, but they didn't know what, and they couldn't figure out how to counter it. You can't develop tactics against a modification you don't know exists. By the end of September, the 11th Air Fleet had lost 38 fighters in combat with P-38s. American losses in the same period were 22 aircraft. The ratio had reversed. For the first time in the Pacific War, P-38s were killing Zeros at better than 1-to-1. Japanese command ordered pilots to avoid engaging P-38s unless they had significant numerical advantage. That order marked a turning point. The Zero had gone from hunter to hunted, and it all came down to a piece of piano wire that nobody was supposed to install. The modification never became official during the war. The Army Air Forces Engineering Command learned about it in October 1943, when a maintenance inspector at Dobodura noticed inconsistent cable tension readings. He traced the discrepancies to the piano wire tensioners, wrote a report, Sent it up the chain of command. The report sat on desks for 3 weeks while officers debated what to do. The modification violated regulations. But it was working. Fighter squadrons using the modification had measurably better kill ratios. Pilots were surviving. The question wasn't whether the modification helped. The question was whether to punish the mechanics who'd installed it without authorization or quietly approve it after the fact. In November, Lockheed sent an engineering team to New Guinea to evaluate the modification. They tested it, measured the cable tension, calculated the stress loads, ran flight tests. Their conclusion was that the modification was safe and effective. It should have been part of the original design. Lockheed integrated a similar tensioning system into the P-38J model that entered production in December 1943. But Sullivan never received official credit. No commendation. No medal, no mention in any report. The official Lockheed documentation attributed the control system improvement to engineering analysis. Sullivan's name didn't appear anywhere. Carter survived the war. He flew 63 combat missions. Shot down 11 Japanese aircraft. Returned to Iowa in 1945. Married his high school sweetheart. Had 4 children. Worked as a crop duster for 37 years. He never forgot what Sullivan had done. Every year on the anniversary of that first mission, Carter called Sullivan to thank him for saving his life. Mitchell also survived. He became a squadron commander. Led his unit through the Philippines campaign. Shot down 16 aircraft. After the war he stayed in the Air Force. Retired as a colonel in 1963. He told the story of Sullivan's modification to every young maintenance officer he supervised. Made sure they understood that sometimes the best solutions come from enlisted mechanics who see problems the engineers miss. Sullivan stayed in the Army Air Forces until 1946. Returned to California. Went back to working on cars. Opened his own garage in Long Beach in 1948. He worked on engines for 42 years. Never talked much about the war. When people asked, he'd say he was a mechanic. Fixed airplanes. That's all. In 1991, a military historian researching P-38 modifications found references to the piano wire tensioner in maintenance logs from New Guinea. The historian tracked down Sullivan through veteran registries. Sullivan was 73 years old by then. Still working part-time in his garage. The historian asked him about the modification. Sullivan confirmed the story. Said it wasn't anything special. Just something that needed doing. The historian estimated that the modification may have saved dozens of American pilots' lives based on survival rate improvements in squadrons that used it. Sullivan said he never counted. He just remembered the pilots who came back. Carter, Mitchell, Watkins, the others. That was enough. Thomas Sullivan died in 2006 at age 88. He was buried in Pacific View Memorial Park in California. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II as an aircraft mechanic. It did not mention the piano wire tensioner. Did not mention that he'd changed how American fighters flew. Did not mention that he'd broken regulations to save lives. His garage in Long Beach is still there. Different owner now. But on the wall in the back office there's a faded photograph. A young mechanic in coveralls standing next to a P-38 Lightning. The date written on the back is August 1943, New Guinea. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through official channels or engineering committees. Through sergeants and mechanics who see problems, find solutions and don't wait for permission to save lives.